The reason we put this panel together of local veteran deal makers is because about 85 to 90% of companies that successfully exit do so through the mergers and acquisitions process. And we thought it would be helpful to get some local deal makers together. The folks up on stage here have together built, bought, and sold over 50 companies. And let them give you some insight into what that process looks like so that you can hopefully get a view towards what the future looks like if your startup is able to successfully exit. In a moment, I'll give each of the panelists a chance to tell you a little bit about their deal-making experience. I've got some questions prepared for them. To vary things up a little bit, we'll have a little lightning round for them. And I'll leave some time at the end for all of you to ask your questions of the panelists. So without further ado, let's kick off and hear a little bit about our panelists' deal-making experience. Paul, if you could tell us a little bit about yours.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Paul Singh. I run Resonate Capital and Advisory Group, and we have about 11 companies in our portfolio. And the unique proposition we have is not only we invest capital, but we also serve as advisors to our companies to help them grow. And as I see, my role is more coaching the CEO and founders, because I have run through the journey myself 3 times. And my M&A experience came from my last company, Primus Telecom, where our goal was to grow to $1 billion company in 5 years through roll-up because of the deregulation that was coming in global telecom. And so we'll talk some more about that one. And with that, go to Steve.
Hi, my name is Steve Roth. I'm a partner with CM Equity Partners. Tian said we're out of New York. I'm local though. And we started out as a general line private equity firm about 16 years ago and started investing in just about anything that you can possibly imagine, from Greek food to lumber to flooring. And then we came upon a company that we knew nothing about. It was IT services in the government. And we bought one and we said, wow, this is pretty good. And we exited very shortly thereafter. And we thought, gee, this is great. So about 10 years ago, we focused primarily on IT services companies that are with government orientation. And we've done 56 different investments over the last 10 years.
Good morning. I'm Carolyn Perrant, and I was recently the general manager of Deltek, and we acquired 7 companies to help scale the business from 60 million to over 300 million. So from an M&A perspective, I was on the buyer side from a strategy, and then I've founded and exited 2 companies, and I'm part of a consortium of investors that have funded into 12 companies and helping them through their path in terms of positioning on what to do. And currently, I'm the CEO of LiveSafe. Thank you.
Hello everyone, Jonathan Pirelli. I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of LifeFuels. We are a portable smart bottle, similar to an espresso, but we serve vitamins, electrolytes, and other things on the go, coming out later this year. I wear the brand, so it's obvious what the name is. Prior to LifeFuels, I co-founded 6 companies, sold 5 of those companies. Every time sold too early, but didn't realize that until later. But then it's better than selling too late. I've invested in over 50 startups, and I had the pleasure of, early in my career, being one of the youngest people in the deal room at UUNet when we bought 2 international companies. So I've had mostly exposure on the sell side, but a little bit on the buy side as well.
Great, thanks all. So for our first question, I'd like to hear about your biggest win when buying or selling one of your companies. Paul, you indicated you were eager to answer this one.
Well, so just a little bit of context. When I wanted to start Primus Telecommunications, this was the time, like I said, global deregulation was happening. Most of the countries were monopolies, and then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to deregulate. So I knew there's a time horizon of about 5 years when generally industries go through deregulation, a lot of companies enter, and after 5 years, they consolidate. So that typically has been the cycle. I have been founder of 3 companies, and I had 3 exits, and all of them started when there was deregulation. From launch of satellites, competing with Intelsat was the first one. Then international satellite communication was ComSat had monopoly, that ended. And then the last one was global deregulation. So anyway, thinking is 5 years. So, and to be a global company, you need to be about $1 billion company or more in telecom, because it's a huge field. And so I was looking for some companies to acquire. The only way you can do is through a roll-up by acquiring companies. You're not going to start from nothing and become $1 billion in 5 years. That generally doesn't happen. So as it so happened, the opportunity came up in Australia. This was a company, was basically a reseller of Telstra. Telstra had the monopoly. And they had $110 million in revenue, gross margins of 2%, because they were basically resellers. Only thing I knew was that they billed the customer. So they technically or legally, they owned the customer, even though they had to use Telstra as a monopoly. And it turned out in that little group of resellers, Fujitsu owned 51% of that company. And Fujitsu guys wanted to sell it. And I found out through some third party, took the plane to Australia, didn't know these guys, found them. And I said, look, I want to buy the company. And they said, but you are a startup yourself. Do you want to buy us? We should be buying you. I said, no, the only thing is I have the capital. So I can get the money. And the answer was, yeah, most Americans say the same thing. They basically lie. Especially Fujitsu had a rough time in the US. So they said, well, I'm sorry, we just don't believe anybody from America comes here. So we rather sell it to Australia. Instinctively, I said, look, how about this? I give you $1 million check, and if I don't come up with the money in 2 months, then basically you can keep my $1 million. So now this is not talk now, this is real money. Anyways, one way or another, we did buy the company. And so this was, like I said, about $110 million. I figured if we invested, if we bought the company, which means we bought the customers, by investing $50 million in the network, our gross margins could go from 2% to pretty much 50%. We bought the company, came back, and just happened to be talking to a couple of my classmates from Harvard Business School who worked for Lehman, told them the story, what we want to do, and the guy said, no, we need to take you public, because the idea is so big, and the deregulation is happening, so we want to take you public. Basically, we took that $110 million revenue, went public in the first 18 months of the company, and from then on, we had the public currency, and we were able to roll up the company in 5 years. We were actually at $1.2 billion revenue, and before 2002, when the meltdown came, or 2001, luckily we were big enough size to survive all that. So that was the biggest win.
As a financial buyer, going public is not something that we want to do. So that would not be something on our radar or on our plate, except we bought this little company out of bankruptcy. It was about $90 million in revenue, and they had a relatively young management team, great niche. They were kind of in the environmental area. And so we bought it. And we went along for 2, 3, 4 years. They said, hey, it's now time. We said, no, let's just keep going along. They said, no, we want to go public. The company's name is ICF International. So we did everything in our power to convince them not to go public. But they wanted to, basically on the management strength and basically on their age. And so the rest is kind of history, but it created, like public, I think Paul may have mentioned it, or I think Mark may have mentioned it. The public exit really is not something that happens very often. In today's market, it's even harder than it was, back in the ICF days and probably back in the days that you did it. It's extremely hard, and dealing with what you have to deal with is not fun with Sarbanes-Oxley now and everything else that goes on with it. And so ICF has been very successful. We're very happy. It was a very good deal for all the parties involved, and it's still an active company that is continuing to grow and flourish. And so that was kind of what I would classify as our big win.
So from the sell side, I think one of the things you can look at is when I was at CA, at Computer Associates, there's spin-outs, technology holes that are not being filled by these very large companies. And if you can find a brilliant technologist who wants to leave, with permission to the company and launch solving a problem, and we did that with Betsy Nichols and I with a company when we left CA, solved a problem, and then we're able to go back within 2.5 years at a multiple that was 15x, to be bought back in. So that was one on the sell side. On the buy side, we had a small technology spin out from a government contractor that was Blue Canopy, and they built a little technology and grew it up to sub 1 million, which was called MySBX, and Deltek acquired that, and within 6 months it was like a 30x in terms of valuation for what we were able to do with that piece of technology, selling it back into our customer base because we couldn't have developed it fast enough. So I think there's something to be said, and both those companies, CA and Deltek, were public, to find a little technology niche that you can go and solve a problem, and to back to that bigger organization because of their infrastructure and their desire to have multiples, you can have some real success. So those are mine.
So I'd say the biggest win, both emotionally and financially for me, was selling SecureForce. It's a company I started in Ashburn, Virginia, in my home. And we grew as a cybersecurity services firm at a time when it was still called network security, so many, many years ago, not in the heyday of cyber today. Interestingly enough, we tried to raise money and failed. Who's tried to raise money and failed? Come on, I think it's more than that, but hands are in pockets. We effectively thought about a services spin out to product. And it was really hard to, when you're addicted to services revenue, actually create a product. So when we finally got over that, which took about 5 years, I started the company in 2004 and I ran it for 7.5 years, and fired myself as CEO to go start Fortify. My brother ran it for 3.5 years, and then we sold the company. And people talk about the journey. It's so exciting, and it's also painful. But when the freedom tokens hit the bank account, it's like, success. So yes, the destination is awesome, and the biggest win for me was when I actually had the financial security to get divorced. It's a true story. My ex-wife is not an angel investor, however. I wish she were. And so I'd say the biggest win was selling a company that was just an idea that was started in my kitchen and employed dozens of people, served DoD and Intel and commercial providers. And I was chairman when we sold the company, which basically, honestly, meant that my brother and I, when we got our kids together on the weekend, would escape to the grill and talk for an hour about the business. It was a closely held company, never raised outside capital. But every deal is different, and that was the biggest of the deals that I've been a part of.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I'd like to hear about the one that got away. What's the deal you still wish that had happened? And bonus points if you've got thoughts on what might have gone differently to get it there. Carolyn, why don't we start with you this time?
Primavera. So when we were at Deltek, we brought a whole new management team. New Mountain Capital had invested. The company was private at the time, on the track to grow revenues and go public within 18 months. And 3 months on the scene, there was a company called Primavera, which was close to the same size and revenue as we were, but very focused on project management software. And we made an attempt, but not a serious run. We didn't, there was just a lot with the whole team, coming on from a growth perspective. And 4.5, 5 months later, they sold to Oracle. And I knew in my heart that we could have done way more with that product and bringing it to the government contracting market and getting a return just because of Oracle's size. It was going to be a tuck-in for Oracle where it would have been really strategic for us. And in retrospect, when I look back on that deal, that could have been worth $1 billion, I think, at some point from a project management perspective. We should have done Now, I should have done more analysis and justification to outside bankers on what that vision could do. And it was just that we'd all been, in the roles for 60 to 90 days, and it just seemed too big and too much of a stretch and, too much of a distraction. And if I had gone after it 6 months, 9 months into the tenure at Deltek, I think we could have had it, and it would have doubled the size of the company, and I think it could have been exponential. So that, to me, is the one that got away, and it went to Oracle, which was just a heartbreak, because it would have been a happier home and much more loved and grown and cared for and in the Deltek culture, but that was it for me.
Well, after the internet bubble in 2001, before that, because of deregulation, everybody went global. AT&T was global, you name it, every monopoly company went global. And then after the internet bubble, everybody wanted to get back to their roots. So we had just purchased at the AT&T Canada, their customer base, which turned out to be a great acquisition for us. And then we found that Sprint Canada was for sale. They were a public company in Canada. And I, not having experience in buying public companies, I kind of looked at their ratios and I said, okay, give a big premium and we should be able to buy it. And I think I just way underestimated how much they could get for the money. And then I told my board, this is a good valuation, and the board was all for it, and could never get the company. Somebody paid twice as much, and I think I could have easily justified twice as much. I just got greedy and lost it. That could have, instead of being $300 million in Canada, we could have been $600-700 million. And so anyway, you lose some, and then you learn something.
Yeah, I had a deal in 1999. I was co-founder and ended up being the CEO because everyone else were engineers. And it was called...
And you're not an engineer.
I went to Virginia Tech, but I studied the science of beverages there. It's a true story. And finance and psychology, a little computer science. So eTantrum was the other half of Napster. We were Shazam meets iTunes early, and we had the platform built. We actually had a relationship with Napster, but we were in our 20s and we were really stupid because Napster was illegal, if you recall. And so we thought if they went legit, we would be the cha-ching engine that would identify songs and then, further employ this payment system to the providers of music. So when Napster died, we died shortly after. However, the deal got away because we had a buyer. CMGI was an internet holding company, and they had a company called iCast, different than the EYEcast that was here in Virginia. It was letter I, and it was basically like an internet radio platform. And so they agreed to buy the company, and we were, I think, less than a week away from the deal closing. So we'd already moved engineers up to Woburn, Massachusetts, and we were so excited about the deal. We scheduled a trip to Nepal to ride motorcycles around. And they called us, and the attorney was crying. And she was really nice. We became friends. We'll talk about deals and how they happen. Deals are about people. And we became very good friends with this woman. And she said, we're making calls today to divest all of our companies. CMGI is broke. And the letters were literally being taken off the stadium in Boston. And I didn't understand. I was in shock. I was like, no, you guys owe us like $24.5 million still. And she said, no more money, no more cash. It's my last week, it's over. So we still went to Nepal, went to Tibet, thought a lot, kind of came back with this attitude of, okay, now I'm broke, but I was happy, and I just learned a lot, but it was the deal that got away. It was pretty painful. But don't hitch your ride to things that are illegal, I guess is the lesson there.
Good advice.
I've got more stories about what went wrong and what we bought than what I should have bought. But the only thing that when I was with a company called 3Com that some of you may know that has been merged into something else now. But I was there early on, and we didn't have many employees, but we had a lot of about good technology, and the Ethernet was coming around and everything like that. And a couple of engineers came to us and said, there's this thing called a router that we want to invent that we did in the back room, and we were watching it. And at the time, the CEO said, "No, that'll never work. That'll just never, it's not really what they want." We were making Ethernet connections, we were making, switches and hubs, and we didn't know of this thing called a router because at the time, it was still a new technology. Well, that company went on to become Cisco, and our company went away. So if I was to think back on what could have been, that could have been.
That's a big one. You probably wouldn't be here with us today. You'd be on a beach somewhere.
True.
For the folks in the audience who are entrepreneurs, they're probably thinking about, how do I make myself attractive to potential buyers? A number of you are in a position where either as a strategic buyer or as a financial buyer, you're looking at companies to acquire. Jonathan, you've sold quite a few. What are your thoughts on what makes companies attractive to buyers? How do they distinguish themselves from the pack?
Can I start? Okay.
Please go ahead.
When we look at a company, there's a few things that, remember, just keep in mind, I'm a financial buyer. I'm not a strategic buyer. We look at life way differently. I actually look at your financials. They don't. I care about profits. They may or may not. There's things that we do differently. But the couple of things that we do look at that are really important. One is the management team. How strong, how good do we feel that organization's going to be able to flourish? Because our goal is growth. I mean, we want that company to grow up. We want to sell it eventually one day. So we want to buy it as low as we can and sell it as high as we can, and that's kind of the goal. The other piece is, especially in my world, IT government consulting can either be very ho-hum and me too, because everybody kind of does everything, or you could have a little niche, or you could have a little tool. We don't really want a product company, so that's really not what we want to do, because it's really hard to maintain inside of a government contractor. So we like tools, something that makes you unique and something that the government says, wow, I could really use that. And so those are the kinds of things that we look at on a day-to-day basis. But really the key is the management team, because we're not as interested in bringing in a brand new team when we buy you. We want you to hang around, we want you to grow, we want you to build it. And then hopefully you've got something underneath that makes you a little bit more unique.
If I may, a slightly different perspective for what I think are the businesses here. The deal is about people, and the psychology of the deal is you have to provide value. You have to show the company, A, that they need you, and B, that you don't need them. So it's very important to understand when you're selling a company that you don't sell to one buyer. There's a reason eBay is successful and other platforms that have auctions, because multiple parties are able to bid on a deal. The second you have one buyer, you're dead. They're going to buy you for whatever you're worth in that moment, or that they think you might be worth in the future, but discounted heavily. So my opinion is that it's all about how you present value, and the value to them is perceived differently than value to others. And through the process, you're actually going to learn a lot about your company, because others are going to tell you what's valuable to them, which you can use for other deals. So it's a really long process. I know we're going to talk about more tips and things like that, but those are pretty important, I think.
And I would just say, on the sales side, simple math, what are your revenues, what's your total pipeline, they're numbers on a spreadsheet, but the easier you can make it for the buyer to understand what the potential market value is to their target customer base or to the existing base. Don't just say we have one deal for $100,000. Understand the value that if this is something accretive to them, they can add on. And the lifetime value could be $500,000 to the buying entity. A lot of times you get spreadsheets of pipeline data and deal data, and people just sum it up at the bottom and say, it's this number. Take the time to really think about what is this product or this opportunity opportunity worth in, the lifetime value to the acquirer, and make sure you articulate that. If they have to figure that out on their own and do a lot of work, it's going to absolutely lessen the value of the offer that they're going to make to you. So make it easy for them.
Yeah, I agree with Caroline. I think in a way you want to make it, the acquirers generally don't try to do too much work, right? So if you can make the value proposition for them, work out the cases, so your value proposition, just like you sell it to a customer, it's the same idea, except you are selling the company now to a company. So figure out what value you would create for them. I would suggest try to find strategic buyers if you are early stage companies, because one, if they are public companies or even private companies, they can afford to pay a lot more, because sometimes they just need your talent. You just don't know what they need, but sometimes they just need the team. Sometimes they need technology. If you can make their revenue 5 to 10% increase in their revenue, you move the needle. 10% is a great way benchmark. So if your revenue can add 10% to their growth, awesome. You have a right to go and say, no, you want to buy me, because your value would go up proportionately a lot more. So I think just think about it like you're selling, have a value proposition, do as much homework as you can, and then it is always finding one guy who can be your champion within the company. Sometimes you talk to 3 people, and in every company there's always somebody who's a little bit more creative, who wants to grow and grow as fast as they can. So if you find a champion like that one, it would, you can make it work.
And you make an excellent point, because when we did 7 acquisitions in less than 18 months at Deltek, it was just as much work to acquire a company with $2 million in revenue that was not going to move the needle as it was to acquire one with $30 million, because we were public, and the whole process has to go. So what is it that's going to move the needle, whether it's talent or revenue, is a really important thing, because the companies don't have a lot of bandwidth and capacity, and they are looking for things that strategically will move the needle.
Especially for public companies. If you bought a company that only added 1% to your revenue, you would have a lot of explaining to do to your own investors. What the heck why are you spending time? It doesn't move the needle. So you have to have a very special case. If it's 5 to 10%, investors would understand.
Great. So let's move into our lightning round now. We're going to have some quick answers from folks. Jonathan, we'll start with you. What's the most number of hours you spent negotiating in one sitting?
32.
In one sitting?
We went all night.
That's brutal.
Yeah, it was brutal. And it was back in the heyday of the .com, and the deal totally busted. So it was wasted. I should have been playing poker. I would have made more money.
18.
It's pretty rough.
An hour and a half.
6, so not too bad.
I want to find out how Steve does that. All right, so shortest time to get a deal done, start to finish. Steve, we'll start with you.
Well, the shortest deal from start to finish was probably 6 weeks. It was an add-on, so it wasn't really it wasn't a big portfolio. A platform buy for us. And to kind of answer my hour and a half question, we have found that if you spend more than 2 hours in a negotiation, it doesn't go anywhere, and it doesn't get better. Not that you can't eventually get a deal, but at that sitting, the rest is just a lot of waste of time. So you can sit there for 32 hours, that's great, but you're not going to get anywhere any further, at least at that moment, than if you took 2 hours.
Yeah, I think like as Steve said, either whether a deal is within reach or not very quickly. Because if you're too far apart, chances of that working out is not very good. So I would say most of the time when we did the deals, pretty much in 2-3 days we would have the framework, but then typically it will take 90 days. As a public company with the lawyers, yeah, I would say 90 days was the average time.
Those pesky lawyers.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
So Shadow Group was a company we sold after incorporating. It was less than 6 months, and the deal took about 2.5 weeks. And that's because it was a body shop. It was really easy. There was a buyer, they needed cybersecurity certified folks, and there was part cash, part earn out. It was just really simple. And there were 2 people involved in the negotiation. So it just happened very quickly. And that's the kind of deal. That was right after the failed multiple hours and deal that didn't go through. So much better outcome for us.
We did one in 30 days as a publicly traded company
Wow.
because it was a hot technology that we wanted, and it was fast and a tremendous amount of work. So for us, that was lightning speed.
Nice. All right, so what's your favorite way to unwind in the middle of a deal? Carolyn, start with you.
Shot of tequila at lunchtime. No, I'm just kidding. To me, honestly, what has helped is to leave the building, go for a long walk by yourself without your phone, and just get a little physical exercise and just kind of clear your head, and not use that time to be on the phone, talking, texting, whatever, because sometimes you just need to take a beat and see if, some things will come to you in terms of being in a better position to go back in.
Mm-hmm.
I used to like to run, but now I play golf. So that's my fun.
I think go have a nice dinner and relax.
Yoga.
Nice. All right, so if money was no object, what company would you like to buy and run? Jonathan, do you want to start?
SpaceX. So, yeah, SpaceX or Tesla, anything Elon Musk is doing. Solar City might be fun as well because, let's face it, we're dependent on things we shouldn't be, natural resources, and we have the sun, and it's kind of a no-brainer. If every roof had those tiles and could support itself, would be off the grid. I think it'd be fun to run a big company, but I'd be concerned I'd screw it up because I've never done it before. Like Amazon, could you imagine?
That was mine. Amazon was mine.
Yeah.
Seriously,
Sorry, I'm
the
taking all the
drones.
answers.
The drones. How cool would that
Yeah,
be?
that would be awesome. But more fun would probably be riding shotgun with someone like Bezos or Musk.
Yeah.
I bet they yell a lot, though. But there would be a lot to learn and just soak in.
Definitely.
And so I was the same way. I'm like, I would love to be a shotgun with Jeff Bezos and Amazon. I just think what they're doing is incredibly innovative, and I think the whole world in terms of delivery of packages and is just going to be completely transformed in the next couple of years. So since you took Amazon, I'll say Uber, because I think their wounds are self-inflicted. It's not market, it's not opportunity. And so if there was one that you wanted to take over and think that you could help, that's one, top of mind.
Nice. Steve?
That's a good one. I thought about Amazon because I use it so much. It would be kind of fun to be able to do it for free, I guess, or something. But I really, unfortunately, other than that, I really can't think of one, that I would really want to run.
Yeah. Paul?
Well, having run a public company for 16 years, I have no desire to run any public company. So I would think of some nonprofit that has actually a lot of money that you can make a difference. I happened to just join a board. I didn't realize how much money that could be there in nonprofits that you can actually make a huge difference. So something like that would be awesome.
Okay. So Gates Foundation for you then? Great. One question that I think is on a lot of startup founders' minds when they think about selling their company is, what is my life going to look like afterwards? If I stay with the company, how's that going to look? Most startup founders like the fact that they're their own boss, well, most days anyway, and that's going to change if they go into a company. So I'm curious what advice you folks have for founders that stay with the company. How do they make the most of that experience? Paul, do you want to start?
So when you sell your company, just remember the buyer, you have been paid, so this is not your company anymore. Try to integrate yourself with the new company as fast as you can. Because chances are your staff, because they grew up with you, they still want to be the unit within the new company. It just comes naturally. So I've always kind of made a point of trying to separate myself out and make sure they get integrated into the new company. Because if they don't, they normally would be out. Because it's, so I would just say once you bought it, hey, you got paid for it, now you're an employee of the new company, and put the interest of new company. You want them to be successful so they get to return on what they invested in you, just like your investors do. So that's the attitude you should take, and And then after a year or two, it will happen, whatever is going to happen. So.
I found that most owners, to Paul's point, because they're so used to running a company that they can't get out of their own way. And I don't mean it in a mean sense, they just want to make decisions. And that's a good thing, except not when it's not your company. And so the CEO and the new, what we have noticed is that we always sign a 2-year contract, employment contract. But I have never bought a company, short of a platform, of course, but an add-on, that they've been there longer than 12 months. So 6 to 12 is probably the average, but 12 is probably the outside. So just remember that if you're strong-minded, strong-willed, you probably are to some degree because you're an entrepreneur, just remember somebody else is telling you what to do every day. And you can't forget that part. To Paul's point, they've paid you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think mentally you need to commit to 2 years, and emotionally you've got to commit to 1 year. Because I think within the 30 days, 90 days shock of I'm in a bigger company, this feels differently than me, you have to set that roadmap in your mind, whether you have an earn out or not, if for nothing else, the sake of your people, because a lot of them might stay and want to be able to, to grow up into, the opportunity of a bigger company. Well, we bought a company, and the founder, incredibly passionate, very innovative, great technology, came in with 10 people. Within 2 weeks, 4 weeks, he had 50 people, working for him. I bring him in, he's leading this business unit, he meets with our CEO at Deltec, and we sit down, and it's basically for a state of the union of how's the business integrating and the revenue and, all the things that were going to be accretive. And he's like, I've got a great idea for you. This is what we should do. And he leaves the meeting, and the CEO turns to me and says, I feel like we just bought a Mercedes from this guy, and I drove it home and I pulled it in my garage and to go show my wife my new car, and before the garage door closed, my cell phone rang, and it was that guy saying, oh, you got to come look at the new BMW. I got a great new car for you. He's like, can we get mileage out of the Mercedes that we just bought before we start talking about the next thing? And really, this is what entrepreneurs do, and they're very innovative and they want to create, and bigger companies usually don't enable you to move that agilely or that quickly. So my experience has been, we never had the founders stay. If it was a year, we were lucky, but 2, it wasn't. But for the sake of the team, just be aware of what your strengths are and the good that comes. In today's market, where it's very common to see people every 2 years changing careers, it's not, such a tragedy. 10 years ago, it looked differently if after a year or two you switched. So just be aware it is a new environment, and they did pay, and try and find the good in it, but you have to commit for a certain period of time.
I just realized why Tien has me on this panel. So I've sold 5 companies. I did not join any of the companies as an employee from day one. So I learned at UUNet early on that post-merger integration, like the people working together, is a total cluster. It's just not my thing. It's very challenging. And in that challenge, there's opportunity, but there's a lot of chaos, and I just knew it wasn't for me. So I've engineered my out before the company was sold. So every time it's happened, I have not moved into a role. However, I have been a part of earnouts. SecureForce, for example, we had a 2-year deal, and so anytime I had an opportunity, I would certainly send it to my brother or some of the members of the team. I showed up at the Christmas party.
That was big of you.
But I started the company, so I was the reason the company was founded. I had the first clients, and I was able to exit, and others were also given ownership or earned ownership and exited with cash. But I just know it's not for me. I'm one of those people you described that, it's just know thyself. So I walk away at the deal closing.
Great. So this is my final question for the panel. For those of you who'd like to ask questions, start thinking of what those might be. So we've touched on a number of topics today. What advice do you have for folks looking to sell their company at some point in the future? What have we not touched on? What advice do you want to give that we didn't get to yet? Jonathan, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so I thought about this a lot, tried to do it in 3s. There are 3 things that are critical, and they're very simple, actually. The third one's the most challenging. The first one is the deal room. The second one is the deal team. And the third one is terms, but really having multiple buyers for your deal. So talk about the deal room real quick. The bottom line is if you have to sign something, an agreement, an insurance policy, financials, you have to sign off on something, file it, and keep it organized because it's going to go into your deal room, or it's like a lease agreement, whatever. If you've got to sign it, maintain it, keep a copy of it. When you set up a deal room, you want to set up a deal room that you can see who's accessing the deal room, how long they spent in it, if they downloaded something, if they're allowed to, and who they invited to look. There are now platforms that allow you to do this. Because if you see people in your deal room every day for 2 weeks, you're supposed to close in a month, and they're not in your deal room anymore, and they're not responding to your email, the deal's done. Go to the other buyer. But a deal room tells a lot about a company, and you want to be organized, and you want to share everything that you're asked to share. The second one is the deal team. We spoke about this, Mark and I, previously. You don't tell your entire company that you're for sale. You don't share with everyone, guess what, we're in our next conversation. There are very few people that should be involved in the deal because sometimes it doesn't work out and then you just break everyone's heart or they feel like you've broken their wallet. So the key thing is to have financial representation, legal representation. A great attorney can make a deal and a shitty attorney can break a deal. An attorney that doesn't understand your business or doesn't understand the market or has never done a deal like this before can absolutely blow up your deal. It's happened to me once. I would recommend highly to get a great referral for someone who's done a similar deal. But setting up that deal team, bring in the right people internally who share value and understand who that deal team is and keep things tight. And then the third thing is, I mentioned earlier, it's really, really critical to have multiple buyers for any deal. You just can't sell. Rarely will you get the best offer if you sell to one company. So every time I've been involved in a deal, there have been multiple parties interested in the transaction. It drives deadlines, it drives decisions, and then in the end, you know who wants the deal the most because usually that's who you'll be paired with. So,
Find your Eeyore. So entrepreneurs are wildly optimistic, visionary, cannot be beat down. We are Tiggers. So when you go into a deal negotiation, you are openly thinking everything is positive about your baby that you built and that you grew. Find an Eeyore that you trust, that can sit across the table with you before you go into the deal negotiations and ask you all the questions and think of all the downside and play the pessimist and really strategize on what your response and your answers and your thought process is. Because the worst time for you to be coming across, with a response that's not prepared or well thought out or showcases the highest value is when you're sitting across the table with your potential buyers. So, Eeyores cannot be not a lot of fun, but they are necessary. And if you find one that you trust and you practice with them and you have them look objectively at your company, which you do not have the ability to look objectively at your company because you are an entrepreneur and you couldn't have succeeded this far if you were objective because you are overly optimistic. And so to me, I think that's the most important thing that you can do in terms of practicing, strategizing, and thinking about the other side, which is the buyer's viewpoint, which will be very different from your own. And the better prepared you are before you go in, on both sides of the debate, the better you'll come, the outcome will be for you.
Outside of everything that you've heard so far, I mean, the key word is get organized. So a lot of what was said already is get organized because you're gonna get asked for everything that you probably threw away, but you're gonna get asked for it again. The other part is understanding what your assets are. You really gotta know what your strengths are. You gotta know, what your people, your product, your capabilities, all that. You need to know it because you're gonna do presentations and you've gotta be able to sell it. So that's the next thing that's gonna happen. If you're gonna go with multiple buyers, most likely you're gonna have a broker that's gonna be out there trying to push or somebody helping you do that. So between the organization and understanding what your strengths are, and to some degree what your weaknesses are, that's gonna be important to the next person that's gonna walk in the door.
Couple of points. One is know your number. You should know, hey, this is the value below which I have no interest. Obviously, higher the number, the better, but do know your number. If you don't know it, then it just becomes reading all those reports, that company sold for 10 times the revenue, that guy sold for 5 times. You never pay attention to the one who never got sold. you're always reading all these headlines, and headlines are normally don't apply to everybody. So know your number. The second one is always get a banker or broker, whatever you want to call it. Do not try to negotiate yourself. Many of them think they can better negotiate. Just like the panel member said, you want to get more than one party interested. That's what drives the valuation up. So have a third party represent you as much as you would be tempted that you are the best negotiator. I think those would be the two other than what has already been said. Be prepared.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you. Now we'll take some questions from all of you. Do we have some mics that we can hand around?
I'm fair game, I guess. You said use a broker. Jonathan, I'm curious what you think of that. As CEO, how do you find a buyer? Do you do it, or do you hire an M&A firm, or what's your thinking on that?
Sure. So we had a broker for SecureForce, and I 100% agree with Paul. We weren't smart enough to use a broker when I was in my 20s, and it hurt. So I think it's a great idea to have someone that's got an investment banking background, who knows the process. And my point has been all along today, multiple buyers, multiple buyers. The best way to have multiple buyers is to have a representative of your company. If you're the hottest deal in town and people know you're for sale and you have multiple inbound, I still think it's beneficial to have a broker. I'd be curious what others think, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the important thing is the time for your acquirers to discover you as a company is not when you're for sale. You need to be over the years nurturing, your technology partnerships and being out there so that when maybe you have two that are interested, you can pick up the phone, or the broker can pick up the phone to the other three companies that you've been partnering with, or that you've done deals with, or that are aware of your technology, and see if they want to get into the fray so that you can bump it up. But I think the worst thing you can do is have a broker call a company and say, "Oh, I've got this business, it's for sale, does this fit?" And they've never heard of you at all. So I think the onus is on the CEO over the years to build exposure through trade shows, relationships, partnerships, reseller agreements, so that there's awareness of your value. And so those companies, when they're like, "Oh, we didn't know you were on the block, but if you are, this is how we could take advantage of you."
Just remember, Jonathan's unique. I mean, I don't know many people that have sold 5 companies themselves, okay? You're doing this probably once. You probably don't really know what you don't know, right? Because you're getting into something that you might have built a great company, you might have built a great product, you might have built whatever it is you've done, you might get great people, but you've never sold a company, so you don't know what the other side knows or what other people know. Get good advisors, have a good lawyer, have an accountant. You're going to come into some money. So financial planning is a little, pretty good. There's a whole lot that goes into it, but clearly getting advice and having somebody who has some M&A experience is really important for you. I mean, I personally don't like that because I'm a buyer, so I'd rather you be as dumb as you can be. But that being said, my suggestion to you is I would tell anybody that's a friend of mine, go get help, go seek it, go find it. And that's also true how you're going to get multiple buyers.
Plus, your broker can lie. So your broker can lie how much interest is there. Other people are bidding on it. You can increase your bid. I have interest from other guys. You as a CEO don't want to do that one, directly. So let your banker take care of it. They have their own process. They know the game to be played. Whatever you're going to pay them 5% fee, trust me, they are going to return a lot more than that versus if you did it. So that's the secret.
Sorry, just know that if there's money to be made, there's blood in the water, and you're swimming with sharks. So just know that and have great representation. A great attorney that you trust who's done similar deals is one of the best assets you can have, and that attorney should be able to introduce you to a broker that knows your business.
And your board can also be great. If you've got a strong board, they can also be a great help in this.
Not everyone has a board like you, though.
get some inbound interest in your company, company calls you up and says, we want to buy you, we want to talk about buying you, but we want to sign a lockup so you're not talking to other companies. How do you artfully say that, I'd really like to get other bids, to make sure I'm not selling below our fair market value?
Well, this is where if somebody makes you an offer and you think, hey, I was expecting $15 million, somebody offered you $20 million, if you're happy with it, I will still get a third party to work with them. I will still say, this is great, I have an advisor, I'll have advisor talk to you, because they can move them up instead of you talking to them. But you knowing the number, I had this thing happen to me. My second company, like a year later, Westinghouse calls, because they were my customer, and say, I'll pay you $2 million. I said, $2 million? I just raised $5 million value. Looking back at it, in 1 year I could have sold at $2 million, and then 5 years later, we were valued at, I forget, $25 million. Then comes the '87 crash, and in 1 day the value goes to nothing, basically because all the venture guys stop investing for a year, because they see everybody will come back to them. So sometimes you also see the return you can make, time-wise. $2 million in 1 year was, at that time for me, was a lot of money. So you never know. When offers come, it's always good to know your number. Hey, beyond this, I want to consider it. But still get an advisor to work with them. No, everybody wants you to stop shopping the deal. And this is where the advisors come in. But you give them 30 days. They say, no problem. If the money is acceptable to you, say, give you 30 days to close. If you don't close, it becomes open again. There's no harm done in that.
I would second that. I mean, what he's saying. I don't know if I'd go out and get a banker, but I'd lock it up for some reasonable period of time, that you feel comfortable with, and then go find yourself a good attorney and, other advisors, your personal advisors, and, go at it that way. Once you get a banker involved, the negative side is it becomes a much bigger process, and it's going to take a lot longer, and it's going to get spread out. And Paul made a really good point, know what you want for it, right? Know a value. Like he said, if you think you want 15 and somebody offers you 20, they're pretty close to what you want, right? Or better. So you might, but I would, and they will want to lock it up. I do that all the time. I'll want a lockup period, especially if it's one-on-one, right? I don't want you shopping it around. So I would just get some advisors and, do it that way. It'll work. You don't always have to have a banker.
Randy, I don't know which company you're a shareholder in that you're thinking about. I hope it's not one I'm an investor in as well that wants to be locked up right away. I hate to sound like an attorney, but it depends. It depends on so many things. If your cash flow's tight, you've got 60 days of cash and they want to lock you up for 45, you can't talk to anyone about fundraising or anything, then hell no. But I think it's a respectable part of the process. We've had lockups in the transactions, the last 3 that I recall, where it just made sense so we could focus on the deal, but it was after we had come to a conclusion. It wasn't the first conversation. We had come to a conclusion and understanding, and we sort of said, okay, here are the terms, this is the time frame, this is the process. Okay, let's go through with it, and we won't talk to anyone else for this period of time. But I don't think you get right at the outset and agree to being locked out of other conversations. I think you need to be very cautious and understand what that means to your company if it doesn't go well. That's the thing to think about. If this doesn't happen, where are we in 60 days or 90 days, whatever the lockout is?
Other questions?
What exactly is the time frame that you should look at it? Your company is now good for sale. Because I've seen Amazon in the beginning stages. I used to work for them in 92, 93. And those consultants who were guiding me for the technology, they were like looking at my technology and 10 times bigger than Amazon. So I didn't know that Amazon will be huge, in 20 years, 25 years later. So if I had a company, if I want to sell that company to somebody, what exactly should I monitor? Should I monitor the life cycle, the greediness level of mine, or something else? What is the right time to sell that?
So what's the right time to sell the company?
When you meet your own number. So, if you have a goal, I always advise all my entrepreneur friends, it's like pick a goal for yourself. Everybody has a goal depending on where you are. So for you, $1 million may be enough. For another guy, $10 million. So you start with a goal. Look, if I made this much money, I'm going to be delighted. That doesn't mean you can't change your goal. 3 years from now, it may become 30 million. But do have a number at a given point that kind of guides you. Hey, I'm going to be very happy that for me, that is a success. And for all of you, it's a different number. So it's not the same number. But knowing that one helps. It also helps you guide it. If I want to be a company of $10 million value, I don't need to be a $30 million company to achieve that. I can be this size, so my strategy and the also get affected by what my financial goal is. So have a goal that actually affects all kind of actions you would take, because that will make you happy. For you, that's a great success. Who knows, you may not need to raise any capital to achieve your goal. So then you can do it on your own. And then to sell companies, I would say 6 to 12 months is the minimum time you should always consider. You may get lucky and something may happen in 2 weeks, but luck is not the one to count on. So.
Why don't we get one last comment from Jonathan?
Advice on when to sell?
Yeah.
I agree 100%. When the number's right and you're taking care of all of your investors, all your shareholders, if you have them, your employees, you're making sure that you're good on all your commitments. The one thing you should never do is have bad karma in a deal and not, it's my personal opinion, not take care of those that helped you get to where you are. So as long as the deal meets the requirements you need, maybe to have enough freedom tokens to do your next thing, that's always been my thing. And maybe it's the legacy. If you need for your company to be able to live on, normally that's not why you sell. But maybe you have a deal specific to the brand. You want your brand to carry on, and it has to be a subsidiary of a company that acquires you for a period of time or something like that. But I think you can't be too overzealous. You've got to just, you can't say I want the world, because you're not the one writing the check. You have to just meet those requirements, and then, and as it's been discussed, be able to walk away. Because the truth is, you might be shown the door after you're there, if you have too many crazy ideas for the boardroom or something. But Paul's advice is totally on point, I think.
Well, great, thanks. Tian, let me know. I think we're running a little over time, so let's have a round of applause for our panelists.